couple of days ago, I finished writing my first ever sequel, and today I'm going to share with you 10 things that I learned during that process. When I started writing my sequel, I was really feeling the pressure. There's a lot of pressure that goes into writing the second book in a series because usually that second book is disappointing compared to the first book in that series. I know as a reader, I've often been frustrated when second books in series fall prey to that muddy middle syndrome, especially second books in trilogies, where the first one is really exciting and the last one is really exciting, but the second one is just kind of filler setting up the third big exciting book. I know I definitely worried about falling prey to this whole muddy middle thing when I started writing my sequel, and it was an entire process to get this book written. I started writing it in June. I wrote a full draft over the summer, and I wrote a second draft incorporating like notes to myself that I'd left during that first draft, and then I sent it off to beta readers because something just didn't sit right with me about what the book was saying and all the different scenes and the overall arc that I was putting together. And the feedback from beta readers helped me realize that there were some really structural issues with the book. And then my editor helped me realize that the main conflict could be changed to have a better cliffhanger at the end and also set myself up for a 5-book series instead of a 3-book series, which was really, really cool. But this also meant that a month and a half ago, when I got feedback back from beta readers, this current version of the book didn't exist. So I had to basically rewrite it from scratch a month and a half ago, which was really nerve-wracking because of this deadline, and just it was a really muddy process. And so today, I'm just going to share with you the 10 things that I learned through that entire muddy process so that you can not make the same mistakes that I made, but also know that if you make certain mistakes, that things will still be okay. Before we get started, I'm going to give you the same disclaimer that I give on all of my videos, which is that this is only my experience and what worked for me. I'm not telling you what to do, I'm only sharing what worked for me. You have to experiment and figure out what works for you. But, maybe you can try what I did, and if it works for you, then that's great, then you know it works for you. The sequel that I just finished writing is the second book in my young adult supernatural thriller series. It follows the same characters who have to defeat the same villain, and the main conflict is the same and builds up over the course of the 5 books. They are, the same characters, same conflict, same everything, and it just grows in scale as the series goes on. There are many different types of series, and this advice might not apply as well if you're writing, let's say, a romance series where every single book is its own complete arc with different characters, and every single character who falls in love is a different member of somebody's family, for example. My sequel was also not the second part of a duology. I've never written a duology before, and so I can really only speak from my experience writing this as the second installment, but not the final installment in a story. And also, if you are new to the channel, hi, welcome. My name is Claire Fraise, and I'm an award-winning young adult author who makes videos on this channel sharing the actionable writing tips that helped me make my own writing better. I wrote and published my debut young adult dystopian novel while I was in high school. It's called Imperfect, and it's right over there. I make a lot of videos on this channel about being a teen author and what it was like publishing a book at 16. And I'm also the author of young adult supernatural thriller They Stay, which is the first book in the series that I'm writing right now, and the first book to the second book that I'm going to be talking about in this video today. If you want to learn more about my books or about me, the link to my website and all of my book pages are in the description. So without further ado, let's get into the video. The first thing that I learned from writing my first sequel is that terrible drafts are not a waste of time. I was super confident when I started writing the first draft of this book. I remember back in June or July when I started writing it, sitting down and telling my family members that I just felt that something was right. It was all coming so easily to me that it felt like it was going to be better than They Stay, and I just was filled with this confidence that was really pretty unearned. And that draft ended up being really not very good, and the stakes were all over the place. I didn't know what the villain was doing. What the villain wanted was not very clear, and it kept changing. So everything was really confusing, and it ended up not being a very good draft. But I sent that draft off to my beta readers, and my beta readers were able to isolate the different things in the draft that didn't work for them. They were able to tell me what they liked out of the story and what they didn't like out of the story, and that was able to help me figure out what I actually wanted the story to be. And without that terrible first draft, I would never have gotten that feedback. I never would have figured out that my initial feelings about the book were wrong, and I never would have been able to make the book better. So even though I basically had to scrap that entire draft and start from scratch, it helped me learn all of the things I needed to learn about my story in order to take it to the next level and make it something that I was proud of. So don't be afraid just to jump in and start writing, even if what you're actually writing at the beginning isn't going to end up being the plot of the book, because the only way that you're going to find out that your initial ideas about the book may be wrong is by actually writing the book. 2, outlines are your best friend. I'm a hardcore plotter. I know that many of you may be pantsers, but I really love using outlines when I write. Using an outline for this book really saved me a lot of time, because when I got feedback from beta readers, instead of going back into the manuscript and directly changing and moving things around, I was able to go back to the drawing board and redo my entire outline and move things around and see how I could move scenes in order to tell the story that I wanted to tell. I could see everything from a big picture standpoint, and I could figure out where I would need to add certain things in order to fit the narrative that I had in my head. If I did this directly in the document, it would make me really confused because I get really lost in the nitty-gritty scenes, and it's really hard when you're scrolling all the way up and down your document trying to move things around. Having an outline was super helpful for me. Because I only had a month from when I got the book back from my beta readers and when I had to have it ready to send to my ARC team, I had to move really fast, and I didn't have time to write an entire draft and then revise it and then go chapter by chapter with my editor, because what I do when I work with him is I send him one chapter a day and he sends me comments on it on a chapter by chapter basis. So because I had this really detailed outline, I was able to write that chapter that I was going to send to him every single day of the month, and I knew where everything was going to end up because I had the chapter by chapter outline, which allowed me to streamline my process and condense everything and make it happen a lot faster. Finishing this book on time would not have been possible if I hadn't outlined it in detail like I had. So if you are a plotter, and arguably even if you're a pantser, I would recommend at least having a bare bones outline of where you want your story to go and work on perfecting that before you dive into the story. Or if you really like exploratory writing, maybe write an entire draft where you're just exploring and then go to the outlining stage and start to piece together where things need to go or be in order to tell the story that your manuscript is trying to be. 3, it's okay not to know where you're going at first. I had no idea where the sequel was gonna go. I thought it was gonna be a trilogy when I first started writing this sequel, and now it's gonna be a 5-book series. I had a vague idea of what was gonna happen in book 3, but the cliffhanger and my original kind of idea and conception for the trilogy wasn't as strong as this new conception that I have with 5 books. If you have no idea where your sequel is gonna go or where your series is gonna go when you first start writing, that is okay. I promise you're gonna be able to figure it out later. You don't need to know the answers to everything up front when you first get to work. Things are also gonna change. You might think you know where your series is gonna go, but then when you start writing it, things change and it ends up going in a completely different direction. And this is fine, and this is normal, and this is part of the process. But the 4th thing that I learned is that you need to figure it out. It's important to know where your series is going when you're writing the second book. Is it going to be a trilogy? Is it going to be a 5-book series? Is it going to be a 7-book series? These things impact the plotting of your sequel. While you don't need to know the answers to everything, and you certainly don't need to know them up front, you do need to put some thought into their answers when you start creating this plot and brainstorming ideas for book 2. Because if you're writing something like a duology, your second book is going to play a different role in the series than the second book in a 3-book series or the second book in a 10-book series. I still don't have all the answers as to where my series is going to go. But I know every single main conflict and climax that happens in each of the remaining books. I know the big showdown that is going to happen in book 5. I know how all of my characters are going to grow and change. I know how their relationships are going to ultimately end. I don't exactly know how they're going to get there. And I also don't know how they're going to piece together the mysteries that crop up in every single book. Things are still a little bit vague, but I do have a general idea of what I'm working towards so that I can foreshadow things and I don't end up writing myself into a corner that I can't dig myself out of later. Admittedly, I didn't exactly know where my series was going to go after publishing book 1. I had some vague ideas, but now after writing book 2, I have a much more detailed idea of what the rest of the series is going to look like, and I kind of wish I'd known that when I was writing book 1, because then I could set up book 2 in kind of a cool, creepy way. So figure it out as soon as you can. It's probably not all going to come to you at once, but it's important to really be intentional about trying to figure those things out. The 5th thing that I learned from writing my first sequel is don't set release dates before the book is written. I'd never written a book in such a short amount of time before, and I'd also never written a sequel. I was setting myself myself up for failure by setting a release date and promising readers that the book was going to come out on April 12th, back when I published it in October. I didn't know that I could pull it off. I'm really, really glad I did, and I put in a lot of work to be able to pull it off and not have to move that release date on people. But if I could do it all over again, I would have waited until I at least had a very solid draft that I was happy with before setting a release date. I think for book 3, I'm just going to give a vague idea of when it's going to be out, like use an entire season, like fall 2022 or spring 2023. And then if it's ready earlier than that, I can move it up, because it's always more exciting to move it up than it is to push it off. Pressure is a creativity killer. When you're freaked out and stressed about a writing project, it's way harder to allow yourself the space to be creative and still love that writing project. It kills all of my joy for writing when I'm panicking about my book all the time, so I want to make sure now when I'm setting deadlines in the future to give myself a bubble and protect that creativity that I have that ends up making my books good. I don't want my books to fall flat just because I'm trying to write them too fast and freaking out about it the whole time. The 6th thing I learned is that you want to keep your characters similar to who they were in book 1. Readers fall in love with characters for a reason. Your main characters, or the characters that you want your readers to connect with and empathize with, should not turn into massive jerks in book 2 if readers did fall in love with them in book 1. This breaks a promise you have with the readers. If suddenly your really sweet, innocent, honest, vulnerable character turns around and becomes kind of a selfish jerk, people don't want to read about that. They are reading your book because they care about that sweet, honest, vulnerable character, and it is your job as the author to protect that desire of the reader. This is not to say that you should never have characters become jerks in later books in your series, but the main characters you want your readers to empathize with, you shouldn't turn them against each other or have them be fighting for really silly reasons, and instead you should just have them be a team and continue working together to stop the big bad villain, if that's what you had in book 1. This tip might be a little bit specific, but I had a character who in book 2 ended up becoming kind of whiny and competitive and annoying, and she was a fan favorite in book 1, so I really had to work hard in order to change the plot and not allow that to happen, because I think readers would have been really mad. I know my beta readers were. They were like, I loved her in book 1, but I didn't like her in book 2. So it made me think a lot about how to keep the characters consistent and keep what people connected with the same between books, but also have them grow and change in ways that isn't negative or unlikable, if that makes any sense. Unless you want them to be and you have a character who's going to become a total jerk and you want readers to start disliking them, in which case absolutely go for it. The 7th thing I learned is that you want to keep things the same but different. Just like with the characters, people fell in love with your first book for a reason. They are reading book 2 for a reason, so you want book 2 to repeat the major theme and conflict of book 1 while still making it a little different. For example, my book, They Stay, is about a girl whose little brother goes missing, and she ends up having to team together with the school outcast who says that she can see ghosts because his disappearance ended up being something kind of creepy and paranormal, and they end up going on this supernatural mystery where they have to go find her little brother. It would be kind of weird if in the second book I had aliens invade the town and my main character and her friends had to stop this alien invasion from eating all of their families. It would be even weirder if the outcast ended up being an alien all of this time and she ended up being the mortal enemy of my main character and she fought with the aliens and tried to destroy this town. This is not keeping the conflicts similar from book to book. This does not speak to the same major theme. These are wildly different concepts and stories and would feel very disjointed as first books and second books. So you want to figure out what made people really love book 1 and find a way to emulate that and echo that and do it again, but also make it different this time. My favorite example of this is in The Hunger Games and Catching Fire. Catching Fire has to be one of my favorite sequels ever to have been written. I think just the premise is absolutely brilliant because it took what people found so exciting in The Hunger Games and upscaled it and made it even more epic and terrifying and crazy. crazy. For those of you who don't know, The Hunger Games is a story about a girl who finds herself in a competition with 23 other teenagers where they are all forced to fight to the death on national television as a punishment for rebellions of the past. This terrifying competition takes up most of the space in book 1, and what Suzanne Collins was able to do in her sequel was take that competition and also have it be the main focus of book 2, only this time something is different. It's in a different arena, the stakes are different, there's a lot of rebellions and stuff happening outside of the arena. The actual competitors are all older, they're more experienced. It plays off of what the characters went through in book 1 because they're already familiar with the games. But it makes it even scarier because everybody they're going to be fighting to the death against has already won these games in the past. So Catching Fire brilliantly echoes the conflict that people fell in love with in book 1, but also raises the stakes because now there is like real life political consequence to everything happening in the games. So you want to raise the stakes, but you don't want to go crazy and blow up the stakes. For example, like if, one kid goes missing in book 1, 75 kids go missing in book 2, like that would be a little bit much. But find a way to turn up the heat a little bit. The 8th thing that I learned is introducing new characters makes sequels interesting and dynamic. I kind of knew this before going in, but I didn't realize how much life new characters can bring to sequels. Don't go introducing a crazy new cast unless it really fits your narrative, but I was able to bring in a couple of new characters in my sequel, and I think that they really enriched the world and also might tie back to a future prequel series that I have in my brain. This ties back to the whole again but different thing. Like you want to tell a similar story but make it even crazier and more exciting, and a cool new way to do this is by introducing some new fresh faces to the cast. The 9th thing that I learned is that themes are really important. It's important for your series to have a major theme. I'm gonna do a whole separate video on what a major theme is, but essentially how I like to think about it is it's the main message that you're trying to convey through all of your books. Every single scene has to be playing with this theme in some way. For example, the theme of my They Stay series is that playing God is bad. I have a lot of necromancy in this series and characters who are able to bring other characters back from the dead. And certain times when characters do this, it's really bad, but certain times when other characters do this, it's good. And ultimately, over the course of the adventure, my characters realize that actually playing God is really bad, and even if they're doing it to save their friends, maybe they shouldn't be doing it. So once I figured out that theme, I was able to really be able to critically think about all of the different scenes that I had in my book and isolate which ones helped advance the theme and which ones didn't. I was able to figure out which plot threads that I should add in order to enhance this theme, or which ones that I should get rid of because I didn't really serve the theme at all. So figuring out this message that you want your readers to walk away with after reading your story is really important because it can help also inform how you want to structure your series and which conflicts you actually need to show in order to drive that message home. And finally, the 10th thing that I learned is don't be afraid to ask for help. Your book doesn't have to be perfect before you send it out to beta readers. I used to feel this way. I used to want to make the book as good as I possibly could make it before I sent it out to beta readers because I was really self-conscious and I wanted to make sure that, I wasn't sending them absolute trash. But my drafts weren't absolute trash. I was just really, really anxious about them. But your books don't have to be perfect before sending them out. You don't have to be agonizing over what other people are going to think. And sometimes the best thing for your manuscript is getting another pair of eyes on it early in the process. Feedback that I got from beta readers on my second draft was mostly about their reactions to reading the story. They told me what they liked about the plot, they told me what they didn't like about the plot, they told me where the pacing slowed down, and from that feedback, I was able to isolate what things were really important to readers and what things weren't as important. And then I could rewrite the story around those things when I heard, the same thing from multiple beta readers. This ended up making the book so much stronger than it would have been otherwise because I knew at an early stage what readers were reacting to and what they weren't. So my advice to you would be to send your book out and not stress if it's not absolutely perfect yet. Trust people to be kind to your early drafts. And, since they're reading an early draft, when the book is finished, send them a final copy as a thank you for sticking it out through the entire early rough draft. So yeah, those are the top 10 things that I learned while writing this first sequel. It was a really difficult process. It was the hardest book that I have ever written. I, spent a lot of time agonizing over this plot, but it's finally in a place where I'm really, really proud of it and so excited to release it into the world. I think that it's a really good sequel to They Stay, and I cannot wait to hear what you guys think. They Whisper, my sequel, is currently up for pre-order, and if you're interested in checking it out or checking out my series, all of the links are in the description of this video. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. As I mentioned before, my name is Claire Fraise, and I make videos on this channel weekly, sharing the actionable writing tips that helped me make my own writing better. I also do live streams and live writing sprints where I, write on camera with you, and we set timers and we write for that allotted period of time, and then we chat about things later. And you can bring different questions you have about your books, and we can chat about your projects and do all of that stuff in between writing sprints. So those are always super fun. I hope you have a good week, everybody, and as always, happy writing.